My name is Pablo Cedillo, and I served as Secretary for Hispanic Affairs for the United States Catholic Conference from 1971 through 1992. The Office of Hispanic Affairs was created to reach out to the Hispanic Catholic community in the United States. The Office of Hispanic Affairs was created by the American Catholic bishops. However, the genesis of it was as a result of Pope John the 23rd Vatican Council, where he stated at the end of the Vatican Council that there's a great diversity in the world of in the Catholic community, and that we needed to minister more specifically to communities that had special needs. In our instance, it was the language. So the Catholic bishops, which participated in the Second Vatican Council, came back and said, well, let's take a look at our church. And they then determined that there was a great need in the development of a very specific Hispanic ministry, not to separate, not to create two churches, not to create the non-Spanish speaking church and the Spanish speaking church. No, the idea, the mission was to integrate our Catholic community. Catholic means universal, but they, in their assessment, they discovered that we were not ministering to the Catholic community. The Catholic bishops did not feel that they were responding to the spiritual, to the educational needs of our Hispanic community throughout the United States. In other words, they were marginalized from the church. About 85% of the total Catholic population of the United States were of Hispanic descent. And there was a disparity between the leadership and the population, the person in the pew. 19% of the Catholic population were of Irish descent, yet 85% of the Catholic bishops were of Irish descent. They needed to include the Hispanic in the everyday life of the church, in every aspect. So that was actually, the purpose of the office was to promote the integration of the Hispanic community into the parish and into the liturgical and the educational and the political aspects of our community. There were some segregation in many parts of this country in parishes. So for one reason, there were very few Hispanic priests. So consequently, there were not enough priests that understood the cultural aspect of the community, nor the linguistics. We felt it was important that it had to come from the parish level. It had to be, the change had to come from the parish all the way up to the Conference of Bishops. So that's when the idea of the encuentros came about. Encuentro was to encounter Jesus Christ in their lives, in their own culture, in their own linguistic ways, the Moris. And of course, the Hispanic community is very diverse in this country. So we couldn't just say this is a template for all Hispanic ministry, because we had Cuban Americans, Mexican Americans, Central and South Americans. We had Hispanics from Mexico. Therefore, as we began to develop this encuentro process, actually it was a process that had been done in Latin America, and they called encuentros as well. But they didn't have the problem of the linguistic or the differences It was much more a process. And the process was to involve that community at the particular level. Bishop Mahoney, then Monsignor Mahoney, recommended to Cardinal Manning to submit my name to become the Director of Hispanic Affairs in Washington, D.C. Cardinal Bernardin was then the General Secretary, and I met with the Cardinal Bernardin and other bishops, and I was appointed the first lay person to serve as Secretary for Hispanic Affairs. There had been an office for migrant workers in San Antonio, Texas, in the Archdiocese, and they had also some regional offices to serve the migrants that went from South Texas to go to the Midwest. So there were 3 regional offices when I was appointed. They were not part of the U.S. Catholic Conference. They were independent by the diocese. When they reorganized the Bishops' Conference, then in becoming the first Director of Hispanic Affairs, then I created regional office for Hispanic ministries. There are 12 regions in the country of bishops, and so we followed primarily the 12 regions, and I had actually 10 offices of Hispanic regional offices in the country. They felt that by creating a special office for an ethnic group was going to be divisive in the church. But as a matter of fact, they recognized that at the time about 20,000 parish priests that we had in the country, very few were of Hispanic descent, and most of them served in the Southwest. So, in other words, to really promote and be effective with the outreach with the Hispanic community, you had to have more Hispanic priests. So they began to develop an outreach for priests as well. It was so that they could serve their population in their own communities. At the time when I was there, they had just named Bishop Flores as the first Hispanic bishop in the hierarchy. And that was on May 5th, 1970. And there was some reluctancy in naming him as well, because they felt that this was going to be, again, dividing the church instead of unifying the church. The mission of the conference and of the Secretariat was to involve the communities in every aspect of the church. Now, to accomplish this particular mission, we had to devise a particular way that we were going to do it. To accomplish this particular mission, we had to devise a particular way that we were going to do it. And we felt it was important that it had to come from the parish level. The change had to come from the parish all the way up to the Conference of Bishops. So that's when the idea of the encuentros came about. The most obvious thing that we had to do was to create a process of evangelization throughout the country to develop the community involvement. And that meant that we had to create a national advisory committee from all regions of the country, so that there would be a diverse community that would be involved in this development. So it wasn't an easy step. There were some obstacles. There was some resistance from bishops. One thing, a positive thing that happened is that they created an ad hoc Bishops Committee for Hispanic Affairs that became advocates for our strategic plan and that's what it was. It was a strategic plan that we would develop this very elaborate process. So our mission was threefold. One's to educate the American Catholic bishops of the need to reach out to the Hispanic population. Secondly was to involve laity, and laity meant also involving priests that were ministering to our Hispanic community to develop an effective plan. There was a great hunger, a great thirst from throughout the country to respond to this call to action for the laity to come. They took it very seriously. So then that's when we developed the Encuentros. The first Encuentro was held at Trinity College in Washington, D.C. And it was an elaborate process because there were only delegates that were going to be coming to that primer Encuentro. We were expecting about 300 to 400 delegates coming to the Encuentro. Instead, there were about over 1,000 people that came to the Encuentro, and we were scrambling at the very late at night to accommodate all these people. But we had already set up, obviously, they weren't going to come as freewheeling to talk. We had an agenda, we had speakers, and the person that opened the Encuentro and gave a very strong message was the cardinal that had asked me in the very first meeting, what is it that you people want? And we became very good friends. Once he understood the mission that they had as bishops to minister to our community. A very powerful message that he gave, as well as Archbishop Flores, Father Virgil Elizondo. We brought a priest from Central America. That started the process, and it was a long process. In fact, there was a whole section in our Encuentro that was devoted solely to social justice. And we had various topics that were spoken by well-known people in social justice. And then they were broken up into small groups and come up with recommendations to the full assembly. It was very important in the development. Again, I want to repeat that we approached the Encuentros and the mission of the Secretariat in a holistic manner. So we had the bishops had a very specific conference, a 4-day conference in Detroit, Michigan, that was called Call to Action. And that whole 4-day conference dealt specifically with social justice issues that the church needed to address. And that was a whole range of social justice, from education, political, to the liturgy, and how the church needed to respond to those social justice issues. Matter of fact, there was a very specific department within the conference that dealt only with social justice. It was called the Department of Social Development. There was a great deal of collaboration and integration within the Conference of Bishops with other departments, with the Department of Education, Department of Communications, Social Development, World Peace. So those, and our mission was to ensure that their policy discussions integrated the Hispanic dimension. And as a result of that call to action, I think one of the most important things that came out of these encuentros was a pastoral letter for Hispanic ministry. And that was approved by the full body of bishops in 1985. During the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, there was a whole movement of the Chicano movement, the whole identity question, the whole justice question, the Cesar Chavez lettuce boycott, great boycott throughout the nation. These were all questions that were actually social justice. Cesar Chavez actually, part of his organization of the UFW was partly with religion. That he tied that into as a religious aspect, as part of his religious responsibility. Now, I have to explain that during that time, there's the institutional church, and there was the laity, the general population of Catholics. They were not aligned. The institutional church was not aligned on a national basis. They were on a regional basis, but not on a national basis. So they were late in coming in to support those entities that were reorganizing, like the National Council of La Raza were promoting social justice, MALDEF, all these organizations I was part of that because I felt that this was part of the daily life struggles of our community. And I brought them in. Many of those meetings were held at our office, at the United States Catholic Conference, without permission, because I felt that this was an absolute part of the responsibility of the church to align, for the institutional church, to align itself with the struggles of our community. Education, every aspect of our life, political aspect. And it was interesting. During 1974, there was a candidate in the state of New Mexico. Jerry Apodaca was running for governor, and he was actually behind in the polls. And 2 days before the the primary election, Archbishop Sanchez was named as the first Hispanic Archbishop in the country, June 4th. On the day of the political election, Jerry won by a landslide because the people got so excited, and they were saying, if we can have a Hispanic Archbishop, we can have a Hispanic governor. And Jerry has told me this, that Archbishop kind of bumped him up and won the election, and later went on to the general election and won as governor of the state of New Mexico. So that's an example of how the church really is powerful and could really assist in including our community in the political process in the church. So, but getting back to the encuentros, obviously we felt that the process had to come from the bottom up. The concientización of the community had to come from the parishes. People were so excited. They had never been asked to serve in any committees or serve in any positions of importance in the parish life or at the national level. And that became a movement where we became a powerful force. When I say the church, and I represented the American Catholic bishops, and that was intentional for not only myself as head of the Secretariat, but those collaborators that worked with me throughout the country to do the same thing at the local level. And consequently, that was a great movement. The Catholic Church was very much involved in Cesar Chavez's efforts. So were other denominations that were very much involved, because Cesar's really felt that it was not only the effort of its union, but it had to have the support of the various denominations in this country. And I think that made a big difference in him succeeding with the Let Us boycott and the Great Boycott. I was involved with him in Coachella. I was involved with him in Fresno, California, where we were arrested briefly and actually were taken to jail in separate cells, spent 3 or 4 hours in jail and were released. Charges were dismissed, and actually I think the charges were trespassing, something very minor. And in a more global way, in the national level, there was a whole struggle of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s involvement in the march to Alabama, the march to Washington, his famous speech, "I Have a Dream." That had a lot of impact of bringing people of color together. And I mean specifically the Black and the Hispanic community. And I happen to be chairman of the National Hispanic Coalition, which was an organization that there were 32 national Hispanic organizations came to actually deliberate and to prepare statements that we went before the Democratic Platform Committee as well as the Republican Platform Committee, as the Black community did, to tell our story, to ask that they be involved in this whole issue of social justice. And as a result of my involvement with Dr. Martin Luther King and Jesse Jackson and others, I was honored in receiving the Martin Luther King Award back in 1971 or 72. So my point being is that religion actually was supportive, was behind these efforts, because that is gospel. That is what the gospel teaches us, to be kind to each other and to support and to correct injustices wherever they may be. So in that sense, and as a representative of the bishops, yes, the bishops were involved in that sense. And I'm sure that the local churches were also very much involved in those efforts of social justice. I'll never forget that statement that the president of the National Conference of Catholic Bishops made in front of other bishops. There were only bishops in the room besides myself. And I had for a moment, had a flash in my mind. I said, well, when he asked me, why don't your people pull themselves up from the bootstraps like my family did, my parents? And I came very close to saying, because we wear huaraches and we don't have shoelaces on huaraches. I came very close to telling that, but I said no. Then I turned his statement to more of unifying. I said, as a Catholic, brought up as a Catholic, I always was taught that we were one body in Christ. That we were all sons and daughters of Jesus Christ. And I said, well, this is an opportunity for us to really educate bishops that are actually making policy for the American Catholic Church and excluding a large portion of the Catholic population. So that's when we decided that we were going to start with the bishops first to provide an education that would, through our committee meetings and through our interaction with the bishops, explain to them the needs of our community. And it wasn't being to be spontaneous. We had to go out to the community and really listen to the community to make a case for the need for the bishops to provide the resources to evangelize the community that had been forgotten.